co-chairperson. The session has been designed to trigger a debate around the challenges faced by the education ecosystem during the new normal era and to visualize the roadmap of new normal in every aspect, be it in the areas of design, delivery, infrastructure, technology, learning, training, and implementation. We have eminent speakers today with us. The session will start with the welcome address of Mrs. Bratati Bhattacharyya, co-chairperson, Education Subcommittee, CII Eastern Region, and Secretary General, Sikshayatan Foundation. Mrs. Bhattacharya completed her master's in economics from University of Bombay. She is a gold medalist in B.Ed from Jadavpur University and completed postgraduate diploma in financial management from ICNU. She is the Secretary General and CEO of Sikshayatan Foundation and Sri Sikshayatan School since July 2014. She is also on the board member of the Executive Committee of Vidya Bandhu Society. She is a member of the Managing Committee of the Birla High School, Mukundapur. Before moving to education sector, she worked as an investment banker for 7 years in leading business houses, after which she joined the education sector, taught economics for 5 years, and thereafter joined the Ashoka Hall Group of Schools, was the principal till 2008. She was the director and promoted a pre-primary school. She joined the Techno India Group of Schools as the Chief Education Officer of 14 schools. Now she is heading the Sikshayatan Group as the Secretary General, where she is the statutory head of 4 institutions. Mrs. Bhattacharya has been recognized and awarded as the Indian Iconic Educationist for Best Education System and Services in West Bengal from the Indo-Socio Development Association, Inspiring Best Teacher from the University of Engineering and Management of Kolkata and Jaipur, and Bharat Vidya Shiromani from the International Institute of Education and Management. Now I would like to request Mrs. Bhattacharya to start the proceedings, please.
Thank you, Ms. Dalia De. Mr. Dr. Vishwajit Shaha, Director, Training and Skills, CBSE. Mr. Andrew Ford, Consul General, Australian Consulate General, Kolkata. Professor Achyut Samanto, who was our third panelist, has regretted that he cannot join today because of an unprecedented event, and for which he has to be at the airport. One person from his constituency has given up his life for this Indo-China facelift, and this time of him being at the airport is clashing. So we move on. Dr. Craig Cook, Principal, Woodstock International School. Ms. Koninika Mitra, Health Specialist, UNICEF. Dr. Shundip Chatterjee, Neurosurgeon and Owner, Park Clinic. Ms. Sucharita Basu, Chairwoman, Indian Women Network and Partner, Equilaw. Mr. Ranjan Meter, Secretary, Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture. Mr. Pradeep Agarwal, Co-Chairman, Education Subcommittee, CIIER and CEO, Heritage Group of Institutions. Members, distinguished guests, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very, very good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the Confederation of Indian Industry and on my personal behalf, I take great pleasure in welcoming you to this session, Recalibrating Framework for Safer Campus. I extend my personal welcome to all the speakers across the country. India, as you know, announced a complete lockdown at the end of March 2020 in response to the global outbreak of the novel coronavirus. The COVID-19 pandemic has confronted the school education system with an unusual set of circumstances. Schools across the country were shut down, which impacted 253 million students in India. This situation is set to have a lasting impact on a child's socio-emotional and mental health, as well as on learning outcome. As a first shock passes, now the educational institutes are preparing responses on two time scales: the immediate return to school and the midterm strategy for the next 18 to 24 months. One of the challenges to effective planning is that scientific knowledge about COVID-19, which is constantly evolving. Gaps in our knowledge mean that decisions taken at one point in time may need to be revised as more is understood about the virus. More than ever, we see the importance of supporting robust research and development systems in education as well as public health. In many countries, closed schools are now preparing to reopen. Efforts to maintain school distancing and reduce mixing between students include closing playgrounds, increasing space between students in class, shortening the school week, staggering school hours, and break times across classes. A systemic review found that these kinds of measures can be highly effective at addressing the spread of contamination. Localized school closures or adjustments in school activities might be as effective in controlling the spread of the virus with less emotional and social impacts. The sobering reality is that even though scientific knowledge is growing, there is much that is still unknown. There is also an enormous amount of inaccurate information and information pollution. What is known is that there is likely to be recurring waves of contagion similar to the 1918 H1N1 Spanish flu, the 1957 H2N2 Asian flu, and the 1968 H3N2 Hong Kong flu. As a result, we may face a series of rolling school closures over the next months or even a year. In addition to reopening of schools, this means that the institutes must simultaneously also decide how best to prepare for potential rolling school closures. We should address the challenges in the system and protect those most vulnerable. Key areas for rethinking and rewiring include harnessing innovation. Many teachers and students used a variety of digital tools. Many have engaged in collective learning in digital classrooms, reaching out to their colleagues, peers, and classmates for help. We must take stock of what was working, what was not working, and for whom are we doing this? Can we use this evidence to rethink ways of organizing and delivering the curriculum? Reinforce multidisciplinary and collaborative models of teaching and learning, reprogramming education with technology, a policy that takes into account the fourth industrial revolution, reimagining accountability, adjustment, and even cancellation of examination in many systems previously unthinkable have opened doors for innovation in assessment, certification more broadly. How can we best align assessment methods and tools with emerging ways of teaching and learning? Is it time to rethink on evaluation framework? What would this mean for our understanding of quality assurance and certification? Remembering the power of the physical world. In the rush to digital and distance learning, we are reminded of how important physical closeness is. A child needs to move, needs to play, actively learn. Humans are social and they thrive with face-to-face connection. A hug emoji is not the same as the actual hug. How can we balance this old knowledge with new digital mechanisms? How can we deliver education that helps children thrive academically, physically, and psychologically? Supporting the most vulnerable. School closures reminded us that fragility of children struggling with a concentration of disadvantage. The equalizing power of education is more important than ever. What changes need to be made to allow us to reach even the most disadvantaged and give them support that they need? How do we reinforce capacity? Reimagining must go on hand in hand with a thoughtful rewiring of systems. What professional development will administrators, educators, school leaders, teachers, and all other people need for their diverse roles? How can schools better reach out to involve all the families, even the hardest to reach? How can they continue building coalition with other key partners to reinforce strategic thinking capacity and community response? How do we build resilience? How can we reinforce the adaptability and responsiveness of our systems? This is definitely a difficult and a challenging question. But with every challenge comes a lot of opportunity. Contingency planning for crisis requires backups of essential nodes and services. Yet, efficiency is the key, especially in times of tight budgets. What is the best balance? And what knowledge and behavior will be required for educational authorities, school leaders, teachers, students, and parents? How do we prepare our resources? An economic recession loom, political leadership, cooperation, and civil society engagement are all the key factors. Hard choices must be made. Resources, what resources? Including broadband, access and service providers. What necessities are there for the future closures? What competencies will be needed to deliver newly organized teaching and learning? How will all this be financed, and who chooses among competing priorities? It is evident that our trust and appreciation for the traditional educational system have shaken during this crisis, and we will see some inevitable changes in the ways we have been imparting education to children until now. Today's session will provide some insights into the potential of COVID-19 pandemic to change the nature of our education system in the future. CII is using the time to augment its presence in a digital world that is abuzz, active, and setting the pace for the future. The education sector finds itself at the forefront of the world with virtual classes, internal examination, and digital submission of projects, just three examples of the paradigm shift underway. To discuss the disruption in school and university level conventional education and its impact on the technology landscape, learning outcomes, academic calendars, and industry recruits, CII is also planning to organize a series of workshops with a theme, Preparing Schools for Future. In the new normal era, the different stakeholders of school education system to develop an action plan for implementation. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them, said Einstein. And it points out to our traditional mindset that focuses on the need of the system and the need of the people, and then designing a system to meet these needs. Yes, I'm talking about design thinking. CII has organized this appropriately timed session under the pandemic siege. Today's session has been planned to shed light on different aspects and will serve as a reference point for education stakeholders as they respond to the challenges posed by the pandemic. With this expectation, I'm concluding my address, and now I would request Mr. Ranjan Meter to take the baton of this session. Hope all of you enjoy this afternoon session. Thank you once again. Over to you, Mr.
'Ranjan 'Meter'. 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 '
You are not audible, Mr. Mittal. I'm just taking advantage by the time Mr. Mittal is fixing up the audio problem. Request all participants to type their questions in the chat box, which we will be addressed during the question answer session. Mr. Mittal, still we cannot hear you. The request, go to top communicate box, and in the drop down menu you will find uh, audio connection. If you kindly check that.
Ms. Dalia, can you please look into the problem?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Just give me 2 minutes, please.
Mr. Ranchan meter is connected. Only we need to, I think we need to
Some audio
unmute.
problem. Some audio problem. Just 2 minutes. Sorry for this technical glitches. By the time Mr. Mittal comes back and moderate the session without not spending time, I would like to request our first speaker, Dr. Craig Cook, Principal, Woodstock International School. Uh, I would like to invite Dr. Cook. Before Dr. Cook starts sharing his views, I just would like to say a few words about Dr. Craig Cook. Dr. Cook has a wealth of experience in educational leadership, having worked at schools and in higher education in the USA, the Philippines, and Indonesia. He has a PhD in sociology from at Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines, a BA degree in intercultural studies and M division in theology, both from Biola University, California. He currently serves as president of the International Sociological Association's Research Committee of Sociology of the Body. Craig earned his BA degree in Intellectual Studies at Biola University, California in 1984. He completed his M Division in Theology from the same university in 1986. He started his teaching career as a high school teacher in La Habra, California. From 1988-1992, he worked in community development in a Muslim majority area of the southern Philippines, where he learned both Tagalog and the local language Murigandio. He returned to Asia 2012 to 2016 to work as Deputy Dean and High School Principal at UPH University and High School, a flagship Christian institution in Jakarta, Indonesia, with some 15,000 students as high school and university. From 2016 June to 2019, Dr. Cook was a dean of the School of Education at Simpson University, Redding, California, where he successfully led the school through complex accreditation procedures. Over to Dr. Cook.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Can you all hear me fine? Is it good?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Yeah, and I'm sorry I have another obligation I have to get to, but it's wonderful to be together with you all. Just a few things. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction to the time together. A few things I just put together in terms of, from a school perspective, this pandemic and what it means for the education sector. First of all, safety of students has throughout been our #1 priority in terms of getting students home safely. Our students happened to be out on spring break when the pandemic really started to hit. So we are located in Missouri, Uttarakhand, northern India, and so we're up in the mountains. So we're somewhat isolated. We have 500 boarding students here. One of the key analogies and metaphors that I used at the beginning of this crisis was from an article written by Andy Crouch, who was the former editor-in-chief of a large publication in the US. And he called it From Blizzard to Mini Ice Age. And he actually referenced the Spanish flu of 1918 and those years, and talked about what happened afterwards, which was really a bit of a mini ice age. And so the title of the article was We're All Startups Now. And I think that the challenge for the education sector, because education, as you know, is inherently conservative, I would say. It's conservative in the sense it's teaching today what was relevant yesterday in that sense. So it's always a bit of a struggle to get out in front of how to prepare students for the future, not the past. So part of our role in the education sector has been to prepare all of our constituent groups to adjust to the new normal, which includes largely, you mentioned in your preamble, the issue of culture and how important culture and role shifting in culture is necessary. So in terms of role shifting for teachers, what this has meant is that we're trying to encourage them to leave the industrial era model of education behind and really adopt what it means to be a hybrid virtual educator, which practically speaking means that you have to take more of a customer service approach because the power dynamic shifts in online learning, both students expecting quicker feedback and parents wanting to have much greater input into the process. And so we've got to be more responsive as teachers and as schools to what the needs are. So in a sense, as you mentioned in your opening comments, it's a wonderful opportunity. While it presents a challenge, but it's an opportunity to shift our role as teachers. For students, it's taking ownership of their own learning. And so taking ownership of their own learning and the distance learning model allows them to take their learning in place in ways that maybe in a more defined sense before wouldn't have been possible. For parents, this role shifting, I would say, is in helping them understand and being persuasive in regards to online learning and the benefits that can come from it. First of all, you've got the opportunity for more peer learning in an online environment, I feel like. Students are better prepared for a digital workforce and a future that's going to involve more digital work. And lastly, the benefits of that online environment is that, you know, in a traditional classroom, oftentimes you can hide, and in the online world, you can't. You have to confess, in a sense, what it is you know, and so that allows you to learn from mistakes, I think, more readily. So those are some of the issues that we're trying to persuade parents that this isn't just a loss, but it's also an opportunity to prepare students. In terms of the school structure, again, one of the things that the school organization should be learning from this is that we are all partners with parents. And so since our own academic year ended over 3 weeks ago, every day I'm on phone calls with parents, either in groups of parents or individuals, trying to explain our approach and what we're doing. And so the communication has to be sharper, the communication has to be clearer, and the partnership has to be stronger between parents and the school in these tenuous times where we have hybrid models coming out or online models. So to mediate these challenges, what we've attempted to do is, as I said, a hybrid approach where they're not just learning, students are not just learning online, but they're also socializing. So besides our academic focus, we've placed heavy emphasis on two areas. One is personal development, and the other is pastoral care. So we still have counselors that are meeting with students online. We've developed a well-being hub that is a resource for parents. And, you know, what do you do as a parent when you have your child at home now for all hours of the day, especially when they're coming from a boarding school context? How to be a parent, how to help your child with academics. The other aspect is personal development, where we still have developed models to leverage the strength if we have to continue on in a distance learning environment. And that is things like, we call it at Woodstock, our Passages program. And the Passages program are all extracurricular activities, but what extracurricular activities are enhanced, in a sense, by this online learning environment? New investments, of course, that's a big feature of our discussion here today. We ourselves have taken a multi-pronged approach. We have our own internal medical team of a doctor and nurses that have drafted plans for protocols. We've also gone into partnership with an outside firm to help us think through all of our community health protocols, which are going to be so important for parents. So they're doing an audit of our campus and how we will proceed with that. And the other aspect is we're working closely with an international pandemic expert who is helping us also localize all of those quarantining and protocol issues. In one sense, at Woodstock, once students come to campus, we will be able to quarantine and isolate. Then we have the facilities to do that. So that's a benefit just in terms of our environment. We will plan on phasing in re-entry of students. And so that may look like one grade level, another grade level. So it's definitely going to be a phased in approach as we get used to these new norms. We're also planning to leverage our outdoor spaces, and that may mean taking students off campus for a time as they re-enter the campus. And that will also provide safe distancing kind of aspects. Other new investments in terms of infrastructure, we have learning platforms are important. What are effective for students in this era is an important question. And also we've have a second external partner coming out of this pandemic, which is a group that helps train all of our teachers in effective online or distance education. So those are some of the new infrastructural issues that we've had to address. Ultimately, it all comes down to new rituals that need to be created, right? New rituals of learning, new rituals of socializing and physical distancing, and new rituals related to nurturing community health. So those are just some of the key highlights of what we're involved in. I look forward to the other speakers on this panel. Thank you so much.
Mr. Mitter, can you speak now?
Hear me now?
Yeah. So
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh my God, that's great. Okay, I've been following Dr. Cook's insightful remarks, and being a practicing principal, I think that's great because you gave us a lot of constructive ways to look at what is being considered as a pandemic, which is obviously catastrophic, but we need to look at what we can learn from it. And that learning has to be for all the stakeholders of the school system, parents, teachers, the school managements. And I think what very nicely emerged from your remarks was that is being proactively practiced in your school. So thank you very much once again, Dr. Cook, for sparing your time. And we regret not having you for the rest of the session. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate
May I now, we have the proud privilege of having Dr. Bishwajit Saha, Director Training and Skills of the Central Board of Secondary Education. May I invite Dr. Saha to now share his views and observations, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think even it's a equally proud privilege for me to share my thought as a CBSE representative with you. And thanks to CII, I think so all the panelists, eminent panelists, CII try to cover from all cross sections. So the true meaning of stakeholders consultation is really visible here, both from the parents to institute, principal, and regulator. So all stakeholder representatives are very much present here. Now, in this specific situation, one thing let me share with you, how many households in this country are really accessing the digital device, number one. Number two, televisions, radio. So accordingly, whatever online educations we are discussing, and it is a buzzword, once the pandemic started, how many households are really able to access it, no matter what progress we made so far. So that is a real challenge as some percentage of household is facing, where student, especially both from the residential school of typical structure of Government of India, JNV, or other state residential school students are now staying at home. And of course, day scholars are also facing the equal change in that particular situations. Of course, some of our even CBSE affiliated schools, we are a very negligible part in this country's at least education domain. Hardly 10% students base, around 20 millions we are catering. So, but remaining 90% are catered by various state boards and both government and private entity. Of course, we are with our family also, there are a huge number of government schools, at the same time the private schools. Now, whether we are ready to address this pandemic, especially the educational requirement of the student and parents, With the help of NCERT, we come out with alternative training calendar. And that itself is focusing something very interesting with respect to asynchronous learning. Because synchronous learning is the special room where the students are coming to schools where actually the synchronous learning happens. But during these crisis situations, I don't think the synchronous learning is happening other than some online activities. So online classes, of course, synchronous, it is happening in many parts of the country. But how far it is effective? Because this is also a new learning for our educators. Many of them have not practiced. Maybe these things has been duly practiced in some part of the higher education, and maybe as a very negligible percentage of schools education where they used to practice with this kind of online mechanisms. Otherwise, the holistic growth, we are totally dependent on the whole school approach where the students comes and to the school campus, meet with the friends and interact with the teacher. They go to the playground, attend the music class. So altogether, school is an environment which encourages the child to grow holistically. So my first submission is that online or digital educations can't replace the actual meaning of school, or even it is equally important for the higher education. But at the same time, this also encourages us to know the power of technology. What way we can reach out to the child so that even something is not covered in the school, that independence child get by using this technology and asynchronous mode of learning. So there we can really apply and maybe last mile reach how we can really look into that, how we can reach to each and every family member where the school going children or college going children are there. So that is a huge challenge for all of us. So from the regulator perspective, our view is that online or digital mode or some asynchronous learning, because the concept now we are doing that kind of learning from home. But if we gradually shift the schooling from home, for time being, maybe it may not continue for long, but for some time, maybe for another 3 months, then what would be the scenario? Then the proper planning for the school management, school leader, all the teacher, and in fact, all the parents must support that agenda. Because different kind of crises are also faced by the teacher and school management. I must address this issue because social media is very strong enough to criticize the school management's fee and other participation, although this is not the forum to flag. But parents community must understand that if teachers are not paid, the school managements are not going to pay their salary, then how the future learning will happen? These situations these crisis situations I believe it is a temporary. It is not that permanently we are shutting down all school or colleges. So that means someday the schools are going to open. Now during this period, no matter, some parents might be not sending their words to the school, but the education's guidance, how to cope up their mental well-being, their physical well-being, everything can be discussed with the school leaders and school teachers, and so that we can address their problem, and counseling and other factors can be addressed by the school. And that things are really happening. But if one-sided protest of non-fee payments and other issues will come, Madam Bratati has tried to cover what will be the situation. So our submission would be, we have to cooperate each other and complement each other. Then only in a systemic way, we can address all such problem gradually. Now, third issue I'd like to address with respect to assessment and curriculum transactions. Now, curriculum transactions, of course, we have to give that, we have to focus upon the project-based learning, number one. Number two, interdisciplinary approach. Now, a group of teachers, no matter what subject they are teaching, they need to coordinate with the other fellow teacher, fellow colleague, and they may formulate some interdisciplinary project which they can connect the child with the real life. If we look into our past policies on education, and in fact, the new education policy which Government of India is going to release very soon, the draft versions also reflected on the competency-based education. And competency-based education is not only a component which can be catered only through the classroom or online mode. For that, student, teacher, parents all together, they need to connect the child with the real life. Then only it is possible. So if we categorize that 1 to 8, 9 to 12, especially for the school-going student, 1 to 8, connecting with the nature, connecting with this real-life problem, and even this pandemic situation, so many real-life problems can be discussed in a group. Group of teachers can discuss with the group of students, and then connecting the subject matter. Then only that independence, what Mr. Cook has tried to focus upon, that will be highly possible if we go with this vision. And of course, the last issue I would like to flag upon is the teachers' mental well-being. So we have to equally give the importance of teachers' mental well-being and their strength on online learning and formulating the lesson plan, learning outcome, so that ultimately what for educations we are imparting in the school or colleges, that learning outcomes or learning goals, whether it is achieved by the child or not, if parents, even the illiterate parents, can measure that learning outcomes, if that kind of situations comes, and if we provide this kind of platform, and these crisis situations would be an advantage for all together for life, and maybe with these visions, we can work together and help each other, so that, lastly, I must quote, there was a poem I read long back in school days, The Nation's Strength by William Emerson. So that we need to work together. We must respect the teachers and school educator and college educator, so that ultimately nation's actual strength, they are building, and we must help them. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Shah, for your remarks. I think your words of encouragement for our school managements and our teachers was particularly gratifying. But you know, the COVID-19 pandemic is unique. It has taught us in a very sad way that the world is one. And the challenges that we confront are not unique to us or our country. We have the privilege today of having with us Mr. Andrew Ford, the Consul General from Australia, and we look forward to hearing from him. Thank you and welcome, Mr. Ford.
Thank you very much for your introduction and for inviting me to speak today. It's my pleasure, and I remember speaking at a CII education event almost around a year ago, I think, or less, which was very different to this one. It's great to be here today. I'll just quickly go through with you about what Australia is what the situation is in Australia, and hopefully some of this information will help schools here in West Bengal. So in Australia, our coronavirus caseload peaked in March 2020, much earlier than in India, and the number of cases, daily cases now, is very low. Impacted by social and travel restrictions that were brought in, education providers across Australia transitioned to online teaching and have commenced returning to face-to-face classes as restrictions started to ease. The Australian government offered flexibility to ensure that education providers could respond to students' individual circumstances and needs. And universities moved operations online and introduced flexible tuition options as part of the national effort to slow community transmission of COVID-19, as well as protecting those most vulnerable to the pandemic. Despite initially intending to remain closed, some universities are now planning to resume some on-campus face-to-face teaching in the second half of 2020, with face-to-face teaching prioritised for classes which physical presence is essential, such as laboratory work. That makes a lot of sense. With schools, initially schools didn't close straight away. Some schools were open to children of essential workers, particularly health workers, while other students were asked to study remotely at home to observe restrictions placed at the time. Australia's now moving to a phased reopening of our economy, and schools have begun opening up again from around 3 weeks ago on the 25th of May. Like India, Australia has a federal system and our education is managed at the state level. So looking at different states have taken different approaches. In Victoria, state where Melbourne is, only the very youngest and eldest students initially returned to school. So the ones who were the class prep, as we call it, to grade 2 in years 11 and 12. And then all the others continuing to have schooling at home. Many schools in New South Wales commenced reopening by asking their students to attend school on designated days throughout the week for the purpose of maintaining social distancing. The Australian Health Protection Principal Committee has provided advice on reducing the potential risk of COVID-19 transmission in schools. So some of these things have been touched on already, but so I'll just go through them in case there is of assistance in schools when they're thinking about going back. So the first one, of course, is physical distancing. The more space between people, the harder it is for the virus to spread. So if teachers or children are sick, they must not go to school. And this must be made clear to parents, teachers and children. At school, the greatest risk of transmission is actually between adults. As we know, COVID-19 has been more prevalent amongst adults. So it's of utmost importance that teachers and parents alike maintain physical distancing between themselves and each other at school. In Australia, we say that's 1.5 metres. And in some schools, parents are not even allowed on the campus. There's a range of measures schools can take to support physical distancing and reduce transmission within the practical limitations of a school environment. That includes reduced use of common areas, reduced after-school and inter-school activities. As we've talked about, staggered start and finish times, staggered recesses, lunch breaks, and other transition times when mixing may occur between classes. Reducing congestion at exits and entries through staggered drop-off and pick-up times by school parents. Avoiding close proximity queuing by putting markers on the floor, something we're all getting more familiar with. Cancelling school excursions, assemblies, sporting activities and other large gatherings. Conducting lessons outdoors or in environments with enhanced ventilation. Arranging classroom furniture to leave as much space between students. Having smaller classes. Providing a mix of home and campus-based education. Student work being submitted electronically where feasible, noting not all students can do that. In Australia, we love our physical exercise, so physical education may continue. Classes should take place outdoors or in very large gymnasiums or covered areas where physical distancing can be maintained. Hygiene, of course, is important, and so we're very much emphasising washing hands with soap and water for 20 seconds, using hand sanitizer when entering school and at regular intervals during the day, particularly before and after eating and going to the bathroom. For younger students, they've developed things like songs and games so that the children can enjoy doing their 20 seconds of hand washing. Of course, getting people to cover their coughs and sneezes with an elbow or a tissue like that, the dab as we call it. Avoiding touching eyes, nose and mouth, not sharing food or drink. Closing communal water fountains and bubblers, students bringing water from home if they can. And also in food hygiene, food preparation, ensuring strict hygiene. it's made very clear that if a student or staff member is unwell, they should not attend school, as I said. If they are a suspected COVID case, they should self-isolate and seek testing in accordance with state or territory guidelines. If a child starts to experiencing some of the COVID-like symptoms at school, there should be an appropriate space where they can be isolated and then picked up by a parent. Schools should also follow situationally appropriate cleaning, and that involves cleaning and disinfecting frequently used high-touch surfaces. So where areas, of course, children are very tactile, so they'll be touching areas a lot, so needs a very regular cleaning. Computers, photocopiers and sports equipment all need to be cleaned. Play equipment. So some schools still are open for children to play, use the equipment, but the equipment needs to be cleaned and disinfected after recess and at the end of the day. Using fresh air as much as possible, as I mentioned, opening windows, adjusting air conditioning. We still use air conditioning in our schools. Also, as some of the other speakers have touched on, focusing on psychological and physical well-being for everyone. Maintaining good habits, including healthy eating, exercise and sleep, are important for all people at this time. We have to recognise that our children are exposed to an abundance of information about COVID-19 on television, radio and social media, as well as from other people. So we need to talk to children about COVID-19 to help them understand and cope with the current situation. So that requires parents and teachers making time to talk to children, find out what the child knows, address any misconceptions, explain COVID-19 in a way a child can understand. And of course, tuning into a child's feeling, validating their concerns, and not forgetting to highlight the positive things that are going well, including how well the child themselves are adapting. School leaders, of course, will play a pivotal role. We have a number of principals here, and they have a pivotal role in supporting students and staff to adopt new ways of operating, teaching and learning at this time. Of course, school leaders and staff need to look after their own mental health and well-being and accessing support services if available to them. Most workplaces in Australia will have access to staff counsellors or psychologists remotely, so at least making people aware of those services. I think we need to recognise it's an important part of the challenge we're facing at the moment is the mental stress that many are under. Important to have continuing clear and consistent communication to help to ensure that everyone has access to current and accurate information. We don't want rumours to be spreading around schools and communities, and this will help students, teachers and parents understand that all have a part to play in slowing the spread of COVID-19. So schools need to be active in ensuring parents are kept informed through their normal channels of communication. That can, whatever it is you use, newsletters, school, social media, SMS, schools, parents need to be kept aware. There's also a good time, I'm sure all you're thinking about this, is using age-appropriate posters and other ways of displaying messages around the school about things like physical distancing, hygiene and mental health. And these need to be attractive to children, colourful messages that get across the idea that what we're doing is important, but it can be done in a way that's engaging for children. So these are just a few ideas. I've sort of, of course, I'm not in Australia at the moment. I'm here with you all in Calcutta, but I've been I've gathered this information from the experts back in Australia about how we are coping with this. And I'm hoping that hearing about Australia's experience, and I think in returning to schools, we might be a little bit ahead of India at the moment, that will be helpful to schools and teachers here in West Bengal. And of course, I'll be happy to take any questions you may have later on. Thank you very much for inviting me and for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ford, for showing us, I think we did understand that, the similarities of the situation between Australia and India. Particularly what was interesting for me at least was that the federal structure in Australia is very similar to India, where the federal government can say something and the state government could have a completely different view, and also some very practical suggestions and insights and thoughts as to how things are happening. For instance, we are talking here about older children only coming back to school, whereas there you said that even the youngest ones are also coming to school. So that was something interesting. And the fact that the use of outdoors with sufficient social distancing was also something quite interesting for me. So I hope we'll have questions for you later in the session. It's my privilege now to invite Ms. Koninika Mitra, health specialist. And, at the end of the day, we are in a pandemic. And what we do, our choices are dictated by how we should behave during this pandemic. And we are guided or not so well guided. Very often we resort to social media, all kinds of rumors floating, all kinds of thoughts, all kinds of suggestions, most of them not so valid. And the rumor mill, particularly with social media, goes agog all the time. So thank you, Dr. Koninika Mitra, to spend time with us. And I understand, being a UNICEF public health specialist, you'll definitely have a lot of insights to share. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Voice is little breaking, Koninika Dev.
Okay, let's hear my. Just give me a minute, please. Is it better now?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, good evening and thank you to CII for giving UNICEF and me this opportunity. And good evening to all the fellow panelists as well as all the participants. So, to start with, as a UNICEF and as well as a public health practitioner, first we have to consider which children and which schools we are thinking about. And I think when we do all this planning and all this deliberation, we should think of the last child who should also be able to access this kind of education during pandemic or even without that. So having said that, I think right now, if we talk about this entire pandemic situation vis-a-vis the schools and education, there are three phases. One, right now we are going to the coping. Coping, that means regarding education, we are coping how to catch up, how to continue some education through online, etc., and which many of our children, many of our parents are not being able to access. Some, of course, are being able to access. And the teachers are also sometimes finding it immensely stressful to do all this kind of online training and teaching. I mean, that is also something where they are not getting the feedback properly from the children, and children, I'm sure, are also having problems. So, and second part will be when we start resumption and continuation. If you can, I mean, we can also give the comparison with the health system also. Health system, initially the routine health services kind of came to a standstill to some extent. I mean, because of the entire focus on COVID, but right now, slowly they are coming back. For example, the immunization services in the villages, they have started. So when the schools start, they have to slowly come back, functioning the face-to-face as schools we know. And the last part, I think, which will be what we call building back better. How we can use this as an opportunity and, to accelerate and improve. So right now, from the public health aspect, I think right now in the coping stage, what is happening is that mostly the psycho-emotional problem that the children are facing as well as the facing. So right now, I think the pressure should be as less as possible. And secondly, that we should also be using this opportunity to improve the parenting skills, because staying at home when the parents are also many of them staying at home is a great time to also learn the parenting skills, especially for the very, very young children and the early childhood development, 0 to 6, we know about the early childhood development, the period, that can be actually improved, and the schools can try to, develop different videos or different, kind of materials by which they can teach the parents rather than the children, how to handle the parents, how to stimulate them. This is, I think, one opportunity that we can think of. And now coming to the time when the schools will be open, for that, a lot of preparedness has to go into it, because we have to think of each child, and we also have to think of the health considerations of all the stakeholders, the children, the parents, the support staff in the school, the administrators, the drivers who bring the children, etc., etc. So how to prepare the schools? First, we have to see the infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure. We just heard what Australia is doing, some great things that they are doing, and there's a lot that we can learn from them. That we have to look at the infrastructure and accordingly decide how many students we can accommodate at one go, whether the staggered classes, alternate or dual classes, etc. And I think the Montessori or the KG schools, they need not start at all till we are absolutely fine. Hopefully, we will be. One day we will be absolutely fine. They can continue with their parents, and the parents, if both of them are working, maybe one, there can be advocacy from the school departments, education, that each parent be allowed to attend the office alternately, so that they can take care of their children at home. Anyway, coming to the students who are coming to school, there have to be protocols, of course. It depends on the infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure we have, whether the school provides midday meals, which many of the schools provide, whether the school has a canteen, whether there's a transport provided by the schools or not. Depending on that there has to be preparedness. Preparedness in the sense, education and orientation of all the stakeholders, and on the basic principles of how to prevent COVID, which is, we all know that, which is hand washing and hand hygiene, which is respiratory etiquette or respiratory hygiene. We saw like this, or using a tissue or a handkerchief, and then throwing the tissue in a closed bin, or washing the handkerchief with soap water. And we should lay the emphasis on soap, which is more or less easily available. How soap is very important in this, and how the hand washing can be done, and you can show the steps of hand washing to the children, all age groups. And also, of course, the physical distance, which is very difficult in a school, because the body contact games, they will not be able to play. So we have to also counsel some students go to school because they love the sports and not the studying. So we also have to convince them, and we have to tell them how to kind of cope. But the exercise will be there, but not the body contact, maybe not the body contact games. And of course, the school classes will have to have the sanitizers, and maybe the kits for sanitizers, so hand wash, etc. Toilets are very important. Many of the schools, most of the schools do have toilets, but these are sometimes not clean. So toilet cleaning is very important among the high touch zones. What we talked about, the switches, the door handles, the computer, the keyboards, as well as the dusters, etc. The toilets are also high touch zones, so they have to be cleaned properly at the end of the day. Maybe they have to be cleaned with 1% sodium hypochlorite also. And of course, with soap, and wet dusting will have to be done. There should not be any dry dusting. There might be some aerosol generation. So these things have to be, and the canteens and midday meals, they have to be staggered. The use of the utensils, etc., have to be very particular, that if we are not shared, food is not shared, etc. We have to see the transport, how they are coming to school, whether the school buses are overcrowded or not. That we have to see. That cannot be allowed. The drivers, they have to be given enough, proper orientation on how to handle the school children, and how to clean the school buses also at the end of the day. And in the school, it's preferable to have an isolation room, where if a child falls sick, then the child can be kept there till the parents come and pick them up. And all the teachers and even the administrators should know about and the students also, what are the signs and symptoms like fever, cough, and respiratory difficulty. These are things which should be told to everybody. There should be proper signages, and proper some posters may be displayed from where they will be able to know. And another thing is, if a child or even a teacher falls sick, they should not be coming in. It might not be corona, it might be something else. But the administration also has to be, empathetic enough to the teachers as well as the students that if this happens, then they should not be coming in. This is also a very good opportunity to teach the students on two things, I think. One is on the health and hygiene, which is usually neglected in the school curriculum because it's mostly the other things which are taught. Because this knowledge, this skills will stay with them forever. So this is a big opportunity. Second is the life skills education, which is also sometimes not really focused upon, and it's just like a check. It's like just checking a box that is done. Life skills education, because now they are facing something which we have not faced ever in our lives, and the pressure that is coming on the children, that we have to know and how to deal with that. We should not be doing social distancing. We should be only doing physical distancing, but socially we should be together. This, and also telling them constantly there are many children who do not really have a roof on their head, food on their plates, and how they are coping, who are walking, who have walked with their parents, miles after miles. So we should also tell the students about, according to their age group, we should tell them about this pandemic and how it is affecting our country, our economy, the entire world in fact. So life skills also, how to cope with all these things and how to cope with being not with your parents, not with others. This is also a great opportunity to do that. Myths and misconceptions. Myths and misconceptions, as we know, the social media is flooded with a lot of material which is not true. So also, which are the correct sites to go to and ask about know about this COVID pandemic, that has to be told to them, and not only to them, to the parents also, because and watching the television as less as possible, because like breaking news every day, the same breaking news is given 14 times, and people get, the parents and the students all get very, very panic stricken. And not to panic, but be careful. That should be the main motto, and that should be the main message given to all. And lastly, I would like to talk about stigma and discrimination. We should know that some of the students at their home, they might have patients, corona patient, COVID patients, and there might be also some death also. And this stigma and discrimination, this has gone to such an extent that sometimes, as you are hearing from the newspaper as well as from the media, what is happening. So about stigma and discrimination, these students, especially the higher level students, higher class students, they can be actually our change agents who will be speaking against the stigma and discrimination, and that can be incorporated in their curriculum also, and telling them. So these are things where we can build better, we can make them better human beings, I think. So this is also part of public health. It is also part of the child psychology. So I think these are certain things that also, we know that digital skills people are improving. So this is something which is very tangible, which we see students and teachers all are improving because they have to do online classes. But there are certain intangible things like becoming a better human being, thinking of others also. So this is something, I thought that this is something which we should be keeping in mind. And also thinking of the vulnerable children who are especially vulnerable, single parent homes, also who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, children with disability. This is the time we should also be thinking about it, because certain things might be more difficult for them, might be more difficult than them who have physical disability or even mentally disadvantaged. For them, this hand washing, maintaining all this, mask management, for example, how to wear the mask and how to manage the mask. So this is something we are seeing, it's grossly mismanaged. It's a grossly mismanaged personal protective equipment. So how to do that, and how to weave it in the curriculum also, why we are wearing masks, and you can start with that, and you can actually have the infectious disease and how infections spread. So in biology and all, there's a great opportunity to incorporate all the practical learning, day-to-day learning into the curriculum. So that is also a challenge to the teachers and to the authorities, how they will weave all this in. So building back better, as I said, to use this also not only as that it's a devastation. Yes, it's a huge challenge that everybody is facing, but how we can also make better from that. So I thought that these are, and also when we are talking of bringing back the students, we should think of, and the teachers, whether they are coming from the containment zones, whether they're coming from the buffer zones, or they're coming from the, normal green zones. So accordingly, it has to be very flexible. It has to be dynamic. This is going to stay for some time. It's not going away. Even when the schools open, it's not going to go away. So we have to do that. So, and of course, we will have to tell them how to be distant to each other, but not stigmatize others. Suppose somebody will have sneezes. So then, not that everybody runs away from that child and kind of says that you have corona. Or these are things which we might expect, might happen because what they're seeing on the TV, what they're hearing from others. So this is something which we will have to teach them. And of course, cleaning, very important. Hygiene premises of the school, that is very important. Isolation is very important. And also sanitizers. Maybe you can replace the normal taps with the elbow taps, so you don't have to use a hand. You can use your elbow to open and close the taps. Sanitizers, it can be automatic or automatically it falls. When you put your hand under the if the school can afford it, or foot operated, the water hand washing contraptions. These are things that the schools, according to their resources, according to their capabilities, they can think of, but certain basic principles will have to be, protocols will have to be maintained. I'm sure when the schools start opening, the governments will definitely, the central and the state government will be issuing the protocols. But in all that, we have to, again, I'm ending my saying, we have to think of the last child, and we have to do this with empathy to see how we can use this huge devastating period as an opportunity to make our children, make our students better human beings. So I would stop at that. Thank you very much for this opportunity. If you have any questions, I can come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitra. I think that was really good, and there were a lot of questions, and quite a few questions have been, at least in part, answered by Dr. Mitra. We are today very privileged that we could have had with us Professor Achyut Samanta, who's founder of CII and KISS, one of India's most iconic education leaders. Unfortunately, he's also a public personality, and there is a soldier who has met with, who suffered casualties and died fighting at the border, and his body came back to Dr. Samanta's constituency, and he had to rush there. However, even then, he didn't forget his call of duty, and he sent us a message. May I request Dalia and her colleagues to please play that message for us, please. Thank you.
Debanjana, sound is not coming. Debanjana, maybe if we can't fix it, we will try a bit later, then we can continue now with the other speakers, and we are just trying to fix it up at our end. Mr. Mitra, you can continue, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dalia. Yes, we will definitely wait for to hear Professor Samanta. He's so, he exudes such charisma. So it's a privilege to even listen to a message from him. May I now invite Dr. Sandip Chatterjee, neurosurgeon and owner of Calcutta's Park Clinic, also a very eminent debater and public speaking person. Can we ask him to share a doctor's perspective on this whole scenario? Dr. Chatterjee, please.
Good afternoon, and I'd like to thank Bratati for the opportunity to speak to such an august gathering today. Just to tell you that it has been a challenge for me as a neurosurgeon to first be able to learn how to see patients, protecting myself from patients and patients from me, as it were, how to operate with what we call the personal protective equipment, which is a real challenge when you're doing a brain operation for 7 or 8 hours. But most importantly, as a professor of neurosurgery, the challenge has been to continue teaching while all this is going on. And I tell you what hasn't helped, Bratati, this is no reflection on your meeting, but what hasn't helped is that we have been inundated now with a pandemic of webinars. And we're speaking on a webinar every alternate afternoon, if not every afternoon. But I am not an expert like Koninika. And Koninika, I don't know whether you're around, but it was great to hear you. For your information, she happens to be a classmate of mine from medical college. She's much better informed about public health issues. I'm going to speak like a simple, average brain surgeon who happens to also be a professor. And I'm just going to tell you what's the solution to all this pandemic in teaching, as far as I'm concerned, and as I see it in schools, universities, and colleges. And the answer is, we have to obviously develop an online teaching platform. But when we do that, I thought I'd just allude to some of the things. One is, what is the infrastructure we have? Secondly, as a doctor, tell you a little bit about the biology of transmission of this virus, which affects our ability to impart knowledge. And then tell you a little bit about solutions, how we can really make a little bit of the opportunities that the pandemic presents. And finally, end by telling you some of the problems whose solutions I think the experts on the panel will probably be able to tell you better than I can. Talking about infrastructure, we heard that you have to do things online. Just for your information, this country has 121 crore mobile telephone users. We have 46 crore users of smartphones, and we have 56 crore users of internet. So as far as infrastructure is concerned, we're not exactly that badly off. We need to utilize this infrastructure. So we have the ability to be able to communicate with a lot of our fellow citizens, students, school students, university students, college students, or even postdoctoral students like the students I deal with, on various platforms that they can access even sitting at home on their mobile telephones. What about the biology of the transmission? I think this is something I need to tell you a little bit about, because as far as children are concerned, we'll start with school children because a lot of you have been talking about school education. In the beginning, most public health experts felt that children are not really susceptible to this virus. This is a matter of information. If you take all the population that suffered from this viral infection in China, in the United States, and in Italy, less than 2% were below the age of 18 years. And it was felt because children in their lungs have a receptor called ACE2 receptor, which is a receptor in our lungs that this terrible virus attaches itself to. Since children have a lot less of these receptors in their lungs, it was felt they're less susceptible to this viral infection. Data from countries where schools have reopened have now emerged. We have articles in Nature recently as well, which suggest that perhaps this is not entirely true. Children are susceptible. The fact is that children do not manifest features of the illness as much as their adult counterparts do. So it's a myth to think that small children or children below the age of 18 do not get this infection. They do. They even spread it, but they do not show features as much as their adult colleagues do. So this is something we need to bear in mind when we organize teaching. So we have to be very careful with small children, obviously. What about solutions. We've heard a lot about solutions from experts in education that we've heard this afternoon. I will just say there are 2-3 small issues. Number one, of course, we have to establish platforms where we can talk take virtual classes on internet platforms or internet-based platforms. The issue is that it's not as easy to do as it sounds. And whereas we can hold a CII meeting on a platform like this, it's not so easy to hold the attention of 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds when you're lecturing to them through a computer and they're watching at home with a computer with the parents behind them with distractions all around and possibly the dog running across the floor and jumping at their feet. So the reality is that there are a lot of challenges in terms of accepting this. There are challenges even for us to teach neurosurgery, believe it or not, to postdoctorate students, because when you're taking a lecture and saying something, you really don't know what the recipient feels about what you're saying, whether he's in tune with what you're saying, whether he's appreciating what you're saying, whether you are, as it were, on the same wavelength. And so even though my students are well above the age of 28 or 30, I always insist when I talk to them that please don't keep your video off so I can watch who's falling off to sleep while I'm delivering my talk. Because a common practice is to switch the video off and be mute, and you can't even hear them snoring at the other end. So we have to, of course, get over these issues. What are the advantages? What can we use this? And Porinika said something which I think is fantastic. To use this opportunity to teach our children health and hygiene. In fact, to teach our teachers health and hygiene. You'll be interested to know that in Japan, Japan was able to meet the challenges of this pandemic, even in their schools, much better than most countries. And it wasn't because they were taking a huge amount of special measures. It wasn't that the virus in Japan was mutated and different from the virus in the United States or Italy or India. It was because in Japan, their children and adults have ingrained into them a sense of health and hygiene. Even years ago, traveling into Japan, I have seen Japanese wearing masks in the subway. And if I asked my friends, why is he wearing a mask? They would say he's got a cold. So when they get a cold, they wear a mask when they travel in the sun. This is inbuilt into their system. If they are traveling, they wear a pair of gloves. You have kids that go to school in normal times, long before the pandemic hit us, who wear gloves because they have been taught this is something ingrained into them. So I think is something we could certainly use this as to teach our children and indeed our adults. The other thing that I think that perhaps Porinika, being a public health expert, didn't tell you, one that I feel very strongly about, is we can use this opportunity to explain to them how all this lockdown has benefited the environment around us, make them more conscious about this environment. Look at the fact that our pollution in all major cities has become 1/5 of what it was before we had the lockdown. And how much of an advantage it is to be able to breathe this fresh air, both for us and our children, who have never been exposed to this fresh air. And you know, the reality is when people like us went to school, having a child in the school who was asthmatic and needed to take a puff in the school was like one in the whole primary section of the school. Now, 10% of the classes in primary school are having these puffs and inhalers that they have to take because they have respiratory problems. So here's a golden opportunity to explain to the next generation how they need to treasure the environment, because maybe it was manhandling of the environment that caused a lot of the problems in the first place. And the third big opportunity, of course, is to teach them about virtual knowledge, to teach them how you can really learn all about history or geometry or trigonometry, sitting at home and being provided with problems that you can ponder about, that you can go to the internet and search about. Admittedly, you will have parental help for this not necessarily always desirable, but unfortunately that's how it works. But still, you're able to be given the plethora of availability of resources and asked to find the answer. Something which our classroom teaching has not encouraged over the years, because we have encouraged learning. We haven't encouraged the techniques of learning. And I think this is another golden opportunity to do that. And finally, I think something that we as adults have learned over the last 3 months, and something if we impart to the next generation, we would do the world and this planet a great favor, is I think we have learned to distinguish between superfluity and survival. I think we have all as adults learned how to do more with less. And I think this is a little bit of moral education that we need to impart to the next generation, as they realize how much we can do with how little, and how little we need to survive from day-to-day life. Finally, I thought I'll end with some of the problems of education, and I'm speaking again from a slightly medical perspective, and I think the biggest problem that we have, both as adults, parents, teachers, and definitely students, is to try and address the psychological problems of trying to survive and be educated in this pandemic. I think psychology is very important, and all caregivers and all teachers have to be aware to teach our children the facts, to be able to distinguish the facts from the fiction. And Murinika again alluded to this in her talk, because there's so much out there which is to confuse you, make you worried, make you unnecessarily get into a tizzy or a panic, that it is time we spelled out the scientific facts to our children. And finally, as I say the problems are psychology, sociology, and sustainability. Psychology, I told you, sociology, I think the biggest problem that we would face is how do you monitor students? How do you monitor it against plagiarism? How do you monitor against cheating? How do you monitor against having a ghost writer to write an exam when you're taking an exam on a virtual platform? And how do you gauge the attentiveness of the student? How do you understand whether the student is able to appreciate? You remember, students are like matches in a matchbox. Some you strike once and they light up. Some you need to strike 4 times before they light up. How on a virtual platform as a teacher to distinguish between the one that you can strike once and the one that needs 4 striking to light up? And I think this is the biggest challenge that teachers have to face. However, I think I've reached the end of my 10 allocated minutes, so I'm going to sum up and say it is a challenge, but I think we have to cope with it. You know, we're now teaching how to do brain surgery on a virtual platform. And I think we have to do that. That has to be combined with small groups that we have to get to the hospital and show them how to do it. But we can still use this platform, because I'm sure at the end of the day, if one of the panelists went to a neurosurgeon and he said, I've been educated on a virtual platform how to do surgery on the brain and spinal cord, and there was another neurosurgeon who had been taught in the conventional way, and you were given the choice as to whom you would go for your own surgery, I have very much doubt that anybody would choose a doctor who'd been educated on a purely virtual platform. So we do have challenges, but I think we still have enough resources to be able to meet them. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm sorry to be a boring brain surgeon and tell you so much about medicine. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. I think, first of all, you're far from boring. You painted a very, very nice picture, and we had no idea when you started. You started with an apology, but I think you ended with a flourish. It was a very broad spectrum that you painted. I particularly liked the story of the students whom you compare to matches in the matchbox, but there were so many other issues. It was kind of a power-packed presentation. Thank you so much. Maybe we'll have questions for you later in the session. We come to, are we ready for Dr. Shamanta's little spiel? Dalia?
Let Mr. Agarwal complete it, then we will try once again.
All right. Okay. Then we'll move to Ms. Sucharita Basu. because ultimately it's the most important stakeholder in school education is at the end of the day the parent. And we have Ms. Sucharita Basu, who's eminent in her own right as chairwoman of the Indian Women Network and partner of Acqui Law. So welcome, Ms. Basu, and we request you to share the perspective of the parent. I guess it's been quite frustrating the last few months. Very happy with having the child at home, but nevertheless, the fact that the child can't get to school, cannot play, cannot see his or her friends. So anyway, welcome, and let's have your perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, CII and everybody else over here. I know many of you over here. Now I will take a very few minutes, and I'm going to, divide my perspective into two topics of today. One is the online school system, and the other is back to school strategy. So I feel that in India, with its multi-type demography, having drastic socioeconomic differences, lack of consistency in fundamental facilities, absence of uniformity of basic education, basic consciousness of parents, much smaller living spaces in many places. Because even now, as we speak, real India lives in the villages, in the smaller towns, and not in the cities. So online classes are actually only for the urban and maybe the semi-urban students. However, as a working parent of a child going to class 6 of one of the best schools in Kolkata, let me honestly tell you that the online schooling system, as have been implemented, it is as of now a makeshift and a stopgap mechanism. So no blame for it, because it is indeed a very sudden occurrence and it is as good as it can be in the prevailing circumstances. It is definitely not easy for a child of a working parent to have access to a computer, how much ever it is said, whatever statistics is provided about having technology in Indian homes, but it is definitely not easy for a working parent's child, and more so of a single working parent's child, to have access to a computer or a phone with decent internet due to many logistical reasons. It is also not easy for a middle class family to cater to the child's requirement of a system and of very efficient technology. It is definitely also not easy for the teach online. So I sit through many of my son's online classes because he keeps needing my help. He gets logged out so many times, and also otherwise. And I witness the labor and the difficulties that teachers confront while conducting online classes, and I'm not even getting into the preparations for it. So of course, we do come across social media posts where we see very underprivileged people trying to provide their children with internet, with a mobile phone for the child's classes. But I would think such instances are few and far. And to summarize, online classes as it is in the shape and the structure that it is today, it is not for the masses and it is only a temporary measure. And also it is sad, but it is true that the more efficient the online education mechanism is made, the more expensive it will become. So perhaps only the privileged will be able to avail very good quality online education, because as we speak and how the economy is, even our country is badly battered with a badly battered economy. There are pay cuts, there are retrenchments. So even the parents, even the urban parents, are very, very cost conscious now. So this was my perspective about online education as it stands today. I'm sure there will be improvements in future, and continuous work is being done to achieve that. To school, of course, I strongly feel as a parent that considering the current situation and the fear of the unknown trajectory of the virus and further the unknown remedy thereof, schools should not open for all students for sure. In the near future, very near future. Now, children, they cannot be exposed to any kind of trial and error method of handling the pandemic. But I have been speaking to many teachers who are my friends and who teach in senior classes. And I also have friends whose children go to senior classes. So schools perhaps may start thinking about a little bit of physical, startup for schools, especially for students who are in classes between 9 and 12. Now, the reason being is obviously the upcoming board exams and the need for them to access the laboratories, the libraries, and deeper interaction with the teachers and the peers. So I remember when I was appearing, I used to draw so much of comfort from my teachers with whom I have spent so many years, and also my friends. So for the students of these 4 classes, probably the entire school could be used to ensure social distancing, rather physical distancing, and by segregating students into smaller groups, making attendance on alternate days, more teachers, and along with this, it is attached to this that we should also spend some thoughts on whether there will be reduction of syllabus and or leniency of correction. Now, this leniency will again have to be reflected in the onward college admissions, admission tests, cutoff marks for admissions. Obviously, there'll be higher standards of cleanliness and repeated sanitization of all surfaces, hands, etc., which have to be done, as my previous speakers have very well explained. Open air seating is, of course, desirable, but with that may not. So we have to be very practical with our solutions also. So I'm aware schools in some countries such as Australia, Germany, Canada, France, Japan, Norway, etc., they have either fully or partially reopened. But honestly, if you ask me, their situations or Indian situation is not comparable with those countries. Population here is much higher. Localities are far more congested. Means of movement, people movement are not very comfortable. I go to drop my son almost every day to school, and I have seen 5-year-olds being crammed up into cool vans and dropped to school somehow. And to put it very bluntly, optimal sense of discipline is also lacking, in total contrast to the Japanese example which was just given. Now, schools will therefore they have to take responsibility of good quality, highly sanitized school buses and many other strictures in place. Now, for Indian schools to be able to follow the WHO guidelines for reopening of the school, it is a difficult proposition, but it may not be impossible, though it can be ultimately expensive for the parents only. And in the current situation, as I mentioned before, it is really to be seen how many of them can afford it. So it requires a lot more investment in terms of money, efforts, as well as time. Now, obviously, I would like to reinforce that it is solace for the students. It is not nice for children to be away from the friends, from the fields, the tender minds, as has been discussed before. They are also going through a lot of anxiety during these very uncertain, unkind times. My son asks me at least twice a day, what is the rate of the pandemic now? How many people have recovered? So all stakeholders, and I'm glad that this kind of discussion is being taken up in a platform like CII. And they will have to put their minds, their forces, and their resources together to make their childhood, and across all the social strata, not just for the urban or the semi-urban or the affluent so across the social strata, their childhood should be made as happy as possible. So this is my perspective as a parent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Basu. And it's been a very, very enriching session this afternoon. But I think after hearing all the perspectives, we need to understand how CII could catalyze all these inputs, put it into action, galvanize everything into action. And to answer those questions, we have with us Shri Pradeep Agarwal, CEO of the Heritage Group of Institutions, and also co-chairman of the CII Educational Committee. So over to you, Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you, Mr. Victor. Dr. Vishwajit Saha, Director, Training and Skills, CBSC. Mr. Andrew Ford, Consul General, Australian Consulate General, Kolkata. Professor Achyut Samanto, Founder, KIT and KISS. Dr. Craig Cook, Principal, Woodstock International School. Dr. Kaninika Mitra, Health Specialist, UNICEF. Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee, Neurosurgeon and Owner, Park Clinic. Ms. Sucharita Basu, Chairman, Indian Women Network and Partner, Aquila. Mr. Victor, obviously. My colleague in CII, Ms. Bratati Bhattacharyya, co-chairperson, Education Subcommittee, CII, Eastern Region, and Secretary General, Shiksha Aitan Foundation. Distinguished guests, friends from media, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the CII and myself, I take great pleasure to address at this session. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on education globally, with more than 1 billion students across the globe not being able to attend schools or colleges or universities, given the context of continued lockdowns and mandatory social distancing. India is one of the 119 countries facing nationwide lockdown, and the implications on the education sector are not different. In India, the impact is quite wide and far, covering more than 1.5 billion schools, 993 universities, 39,931 colleges, 10,725 standalone institutes, and multiple other vocational institutes and private coaching centers. With the lockdown entering into fifth phase, the measures and rigor in the lockdown varying from state to state basis, respective to geography-specific dynamics, the narrative is gradually shifting from when will the lockdown end to how do we gradually crawl back to a business as usual scenario with necessary preventive measures and accept that COVID-19, like other elements, is here to stay amongst us for the foreseeable future until we get the visibility of a vaccine for the same. Given this backdrop, one question that keeps coming to our mind is whether educational institutions too should follow suit or remain closed till there are nil cases reported. We find there are valid and logical arguments from either sides. And while this may take its time to draw consensus, it would be safe to assume that educational institutions will have to follow a measured approach, and more institutions will resume operations sooner or later amidst this pandemic. The next logical questions that crops up to our minds is what the precautions that need to be taken if institutions were to explore the possibility of gradually opening their campuses to give stakeholders the necessary confidence, and above all, ensuring well-being of the students and all stakeholders. While schools are closed in many countries during the pandemic, learning isn't on hold. In many systems, digital tools have allowed students to learn at distance. For students without internet, lessons are being broadcast on TV or printed worksheets distributed to enable continued learning. A key concern is how to compensate for the lost instruction time and its potential effects on learning. Research on school breaks, where children have a gap in formal education, so that it is the most privileged, it is the most disadvantaged who have the greatest risk of learning loss. Estimates suggest it can take up to 6 weeks of adjustment time for these students to be mentally and physically ready to re-engage with the curriculum after a summer break. During the pandemic, most students spent more time in digital environment, many less supervised. They potentially have more exposure to cyber risks, and indeed some authorities are warning of a sizable increase in the number of complaints to cyber risk tip lines and other monitoring and health services. Both parents and child skill levels are important for students' resilience to digital risks. However, some risks require government or industry action, while other safeguards require levels of digital literacy that may adults don't have. In the rush to go digital as a response to COVID-19, not all schools and systems were able to review privacy agreements or the security of digital products and platforms. As a result, schools are using a wide range of products, not all with sufficient student security or privacy. The impact of misinformation and disinformation on children, access to adult content, and data breaches highlight the need for clear age restrictions and safety by design. In addition, monitoring adherence to existing measure is crucial. From day one of the pandemic, teachers had to adapt to a new context and pace, taking on increased responsibilities for ensuring students' well-being, and for many also learn new digital tools. Preparing for the next months and years requires rethinking key elements of teachers' professionalism, knowledge, collaboration, and autonomy, as well as the prestige of the profession. Reflecting on these issues is also critical for ensuring teachers' well-being in the long run. Teachers' roles and responsibilities may be quite differently balanced when schools reopen. While facilitating students' learning remains a priority, providing emotional support to students, parents, and families, and participating in a strategic planning and decision-making will likely take more space than before. To fulfill the multiple roles, the teaching profession need to continue updating their knowledge and competencies, including knowledge on instruction, learning, assessment, leadership for change. Schools will need to focus jointly with families and the larger community on three crucial areas as they move forward: reinforcing safety and trust, ensuring student well-being and learning continuity, and building resilience through collective reflection, enhanced collaboration, and distributed leadership. Transparent and timely communication at all levels is the key. Parents need information about the reopening date, timetable for first few weeks, new safety and hygiene measures, and services to support children and parents. Virtual meetings, blogs, and chat groups allow parents to interact, share experiences, and support each other. As the crisis continues, shared responsibility within schools and between schools and the wider community can help education services to act on as many fronts. These include precautionary health measures, exceptional demands on staffing and budgets, and adjustments to curriculum and assessment methods. Preparing for potential future closure while addressing current urgencies requires clear leadership as well as adaptability, coordination, and trust. Once the situation improves and there is some guidance from the government on reopening of educational institutions, the school leaders will need to assess a wide set of considerations in order to chalk out a way forward. They will also need to ensure that the key stakeholders are also a part of the decision-making process for seamless resumption. As we concluded with a set of top priorities for action: ensuring safety, school buildings must be disinfected and adequate ventilation of classrooms ensured in an ongoing manner. Assessing progress, ministries are now adjusting or foregoing exams and assessments. Once back to school, diagnostic formative assessment of all students will be needed to help plan and organize their learning. Mitigating the impact of learning losses. Some students will have fallen behind and others will have lost learning compared to before school closures. There is an increased risk of early school leaving for struggling students, while targeting learning support will be needed. Efforts to address learning loss must avoid creating systematic traps for the disadvantaged, for example, large-scale grade repetition. Ensuring well-being, many students will experience emotional distress from the pandemic, ranging from anxiety to post-traumatic stress symptoms. Some students will have had poor nutrition due to lack of schools, due to lack of access to school meals. Student mental and physical health will need explicit support in the return to normal life. From CII, we would definitely work closely with all stakeholders to mitigate the loss and how to make the sector smooth sailing amidst this crisis. As a part of this effort, CII is planning for year-long activities to engage stakeholders on different issues. As a part of this endeavor, I'm happy to share that CII is organizing a digital conference cum exhibition titled Redefining Education for the Emerging World from 25th June onwards. This appropriately timed long extravaganza will combine both school and higher education sector under one umbrella. There will be separate days dedicated to higher education and school education sector. There will be policy dialogues with center as well as the state governments, alongside a whole host of activities such as workshops, master classes, town hall with CEOs. The aim would be to highlight the myriad changes in the curriculum and pedagogy propelled by the loss in physical mobility. There will be discussions on the impact of corona-induced downturn, its effect on recruitment and hiring process, and how higher education institutes are responding to this development. I would like to request all schools and higher education institutes to come forward to join at this high-tech virtual platform, which will offer a unique opportunity to network, collaborate, and showcase novel initiatives. With this, I am concluding my speech. I would like to thank all the speakers across the country for joining us today in spite of their extremely busy schedule. CII would draw up recommendations from today's deliberations and submit it to the ministry so that a robust SOP will be in place when the institution will reopen. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal, for summing up and providing a way forward and suggesting the way CII could actually contribute, and the flagship event that you very kindly mentioned. I'm sure many of the participants here will take up the offer and will join us. May we now request for the video of Professor Achyut Samanta to be played?
We cannot hear anything.
হ্যাঁ কিছুই তো শুনতে পাচ্ছি না আবার এটা বন্ধ করে দিন
Sorry, it seems that the audio is not clear. So in that case, Mr. Mitter, you would like to continue with the...
Yes, I think anyway we have, it's a pity, but nevertheless, we've already overshot the time by about half an hour, and we have a few questions, although not too many. So may I request panelists to stand by and take some of these questions? There's a question from Mr. Kaushik Ganguly. How would the library and lab facilities be provided after school reopens? And what will be the librarian's role? May I request Ms. Bratati Bhattacharyya to shed some light on this, please? Hello?
Thank you,
Hello?
Mr. Mittal.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. There is a concept of digital library. And even for a digital library, the requirement of a librarian is of immense importance, because a digital librarian also needs to see how the library can be organized and it is accessible to students. So this is a new way of learning, and students need to get access to that digital library. So I think briefly I have put it forward for you.
Yeah, I think there was another part to the question. How would the library and lab facilities be provided after school reopens?
After school reopens, we have to again stagger our students coming into the school, because it cannot be that students come every day. So I think the college or the school authorities will look into that as to how the students would be coming in, and the logistics will be followed. Students will not come every day. Maybe they will come in small groups in a different timing, which I had also addressed in my, this address in the afternoon, that students cannot be coming all together. They will be staggered, and that will be logistically organized by the school authorities.
Okay.
We have to space them out, because if a library has a capacity of 40 students, maybe we will accommodate only 10 of them in the library, access the books. Every day sanitization has to be done on the books if they are physically taking the books home. If they are going to the labs, sanitization has to be done for all the equipments before the children come in. And this will be done again in a staggered manner.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I think that was quite insightful, and I hope the person who's asked the question has got his reply. We now shift to another question, and this I would request Mr. Pradeep Agarwal to answer. The question is as follows. Gradually, the focus of students is shifting from learning to purely career-oriented. It has become a great responsibility on education providers assembled here to strike a proper balance between learning and earning. What are the ways forward? Mr. Agarwal, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think learning leads to the career opportunities. So whenever anyone is joining for any course, so there has to be some outcome. Either they are going for higher education, for maybe teaching purpose, or for research and development, or otherwise they are going for job. So, but during this pandemic, I think everybody shifted to online learning. But I think it will lead to hybrid mode of learning. Now there will be entire world, even the abroad, Harvard and others are now conducting online classes. Even in due course of time, they have fully residential programs, 1 year or 2 year. Now they are offering online, which will be treated as a residential program. So now even in school, even the pandemic is over, I think hybrid way of teaching learning will start. And it is not just learning, it leads to the career development as well. I hope I answered properly.
Thank you. And I think you brought out a new thing with hybrid learning. I think you're very right, because we will never go back to what we were. COVID-19 will have taught us many new things, and this is one of them. So thank you very much. May I now request Dr. Koninika Mitra to take up a third question, which, part of it you touched upon, but this question is, what skills do students need to cope up with this difficult situation of board planning to go ahead with examinations? Dr. Koninika Mitro, please. Dr. Mitro? Dr. Koninika Mitro, is she there somewhere?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear. Yeah, please.
The question was about how they will prepare themselves for the board exam, right?
Yes.
See, as I mean, that I suppose the teachers would be able to, and the education specialists, they will be.
No, I think they're talking more about the life skill part. That's probably more,
okay,
the coping strategies,
Right. So first thing is, I think the onus is also on the teachers as well as the parents to make feel not stressed. Because right now, even with the online classes, we are seeing sometimes the parents are kind of demanding that they be given homeworks also online, and sometimes the teachers are also too ambitious, that students will be able to understand and will be able to also do the online plus the homework. So this is something, the stress has to be removed from their from the students' minds. That's very important, because in that case, if the parents as well as the teachers are not putting the pressure on them, I think they will be better off. Also, there's something called peer pressure, because we know that even if there's less pressure from the parents or the teachers, sometimes the peers, there's that competitive spirit that's there. So I think it's everybody's duty, even the administrator's duty, to see that the students are not pressurized. And again, as we say, that this is a big opportunity to teach them the life skills and what is important, what are the priorities. As you heard Dr. Shondip Chatterjee say, that what is most important, survival and the superfluous things. So I'm not saying that this is superfluous excelling in exams, but what is more important, what is the core, that has to be told to them.
You are now the host of this event.
And I hope that the exams will also be of a different type. I'm not sure exactly how the exams will be, how the exams will be, what kind of questions and how it will be done. But I hope that that will also be flexible, and that will, to meet the challenges of the students and this situation, unusual situation. I think that's what I can say. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Mitro. I would now like to come to Dr. Shondip Chatterjee with my last question for the day, hopefully. And this is a question from Mr. Bhaskar Basu. And he asks something which is very interesting. What about the future of sports and extracurricular activities? So I think we all know that it's paused for quite some time, but he's asking about the future of sports and extracurricular activities. Can't hear you, sir.
Yeah, I have to confess that I am not an expert in answering this question, but I'll speak from common sense. I mean, you don't need much of neurosurgical wisdom to answer this question, but I think we will have a very long pause button, as you quite rightly say. But I think a life after the pandemic, we're going to have a BC and an AC. So we'll have before Corona and after Corona in our lives and in the history of the way this planet's history will be written. And I think as we go forward, we will have more sporting activity that we will have to view sitting at home rather than actually being in the stadium. That's the first thing. We're not going to have 60,000 people sitting in Eden Gardens watching a match in the near future. So we'll have to get used to seeing things at home on our television sets. We'll have to have players who will be in empty arenas and who will know that what they're doing is being telecast live, even around the world, but they're not going to have people shouting in the stadium itself. And finally, in terms of contact sports, that's the bit that worries me the most. The sort of sports where you're actually very close to your competitor, like wrestling, for example. I think that's going to be the last sports that will have to recover after this pandemic. But I think we will eventually get there. I don't think this is going to last forever. No pandemic can last forever. and the virus cannot last. Remember, it's a small little creature, smaller than your cell, that has to constantly modify itself to be able to survive in your and my body. So I don't think it can continue to change itself to live forever. So I think we will be back to normal, but it may take months, even more than a year.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee, and I would like to thank all the panelists today for a wonderful and enriching session, and I say that on behalf of all the participants. We've had a very encouraging participation in this very timely seminar organized by CII Eastern Region. We had eminent educationists from our own city, but we were not restricted to that. We also had public health specialists. We had an eminent doctor with a lot of common sense, of course. And we also had an international perspective from Mr. Andrew Ford. We had the principal of Woodstock, so somebody who's not from India, but who's made India at least his temporary home. We got a perspective of the regulatory body from the director CBSE, and last but not least, we had the perspective of the parent, because it's the parent who has been at the receiving end. The parent who thought, I sent my child to school, and now the school has at least jointly taken up the responsibility of bringing up my child, and suddenly, all of a sudden, he realizes that school can't open its doors to the children, and the children are at home, and the parents have to go out to work. So it's been a very frustrating time, but at the close of it, we had, I think, throughout the afternoon, right from the beginning, we had words of hope from the first speaker, right from Bratati ma'am, all through each one of the panelists have shown that this pandemic can open a window of hope, a window of opportunity, and a new way of doing things. And what we finally concluded just before the final comments was one from Sri Pradeep Agarwal, co-chairperson of CII, who said that, after the pandemic is gone, things won't go back to where they were. We would have an era of hybrid learning. So I think we are about to enter into a new era in education. And I join Mr. Pradeep Agarwal and CII Eastern Region in welcoming all of you to the Education Festival, which is about to start. And I'd be failing in my duty if I didn't thank, on behalf of all of us here, two very important people, Sri Madan Mohanka, who was the catalyst, the chairman of the Education Subcommittee, who catalyzed today, although he may not be physically present or even virtually, but it was his inspiration and his effort that led to this day happening. And of course, the ever-present Ms. Dalia Dey, who made, and her colleagues, who made the thing actually happen in practice. Thank you all very much, and have a great evening and a lovely week ahead. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittal.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Ford, and everyone else.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Dr. Shah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
And
ma'am.
thanks, Ms. Dey.
Thank you.